As we've heard, the Environment Agency Chief, Lord Smith, has said that the country may have to choose between protecting town or country against future floods because it's becoming too costly to defend both. Writing in the Daily Telegraph, Chris Smith questioned how much should be spent saving Lincolnshire, Yorkshire, East Anglia and Somerset. The Conservative MP for Bridgewater, Ian Liddle-Granger, claimed Lord Smith was hiding his failings, and the local farming community is not much happier.
Lord Smith said something would be done within 6 months, and that was a year ago. And, you know, I have a great mistrust in the EA management now because they haven't come to fruition. They seem to be backing out of what Owen Paterson has said and David Cameron. They seem to be putting red tape in the way. They just don't want to admit that they've failed us.
So I asked Lord Smith earlier why they seem to have less money and resource to work with, but more water to cope with.
Have constrained budgets, of course. Everyone in the public sector these days does. And you're right, we have more and more water to deal with. It has been the wettest January in the south of England for something like over 100 years. It was the stormiest December that we've ever had. The surge on the east and south coasts at the start of December was higher in some places than it was back in those tragic days in 1953. We have been facing really, really severe weather conditions. And I fear that with the march of climate change, the prospects are going to continue to get worse.
So a child in the next generation will be trying to learn a different kind of map of Britain to that which we grew up with.
We are going to face more storms, more floods, and probably more droughts as well. Climate change will bring with it much more extremes of weather. And I think more like what we've been seeing over the course of the last couple of years. Now, we will need to make decisions as a country about where we are going to defend against flooding and against sea incursion into the coasts, and where we are not. Those are decisions that have to be made by government and by local communities.
Part of the picture in the overall strategy for Britain is the whole business of protecting buildings that have been put up on the floodplain. And I'm wondering, given that the first attention to that problem was drawn in 1953 after the Linton and Lynmouth floods, why it is today that anybody is being allowed to build anything anywhere near the floodplain, and why don't you have the mandatory power to prevent it?
Well, we are in the Environment Agency a statutory consultee. And what that means is that if a planning application goes into a local authority for a development in the floodplain, the local authority has to consult us, and we will advise. And in virtually every case of that kind, we will probably advise against building in the floodplain.
Well, how many times do you think, even in your tenure, has your advice been ignored?
Over the last couple of years, local authorities have followed our advice in 96% of cases. So it's only been 4% of cases where they haven't.
Do you feel the political leadership over this period of crisis has been up to snuff?
I've been working very closely with Owen Paterson as the Secretary of State, and indeed I was talking with him on the phone just an hour ago, and we were completely in agreement about what needs to be done now, both for Somerset and for the wider issues around the country.
Because the Conservative MP in the district has been very vocal and rather focused on his criticism of really all the policy making that's gone on around the levels.
Yes, I'm not going to get into the business of silly name calling with Mr. Liddle-Granger. It seems to be his forte. There are much more serious issues at stake here, and I want to get on together with the government, together with the local drainage boards and the local authorities. I want to get on with the business of making sure we solve the problems.